The Kingdom Cassette Service, produced by the Federation of the Covenant People, P.O. Box 830 Honeydew with a postal code of 2040, offers the 26th recording in this series under the title, Islam, a Sword or a Sickle. Now, before considering the explanation behind the title of this address, I would like to draw your attention to the modern situation, the present world situation. And I would like to draw your attention particularly to the situation in Afghanistan, which has triggered off a considerable speculation and has given rise to talks of war, which for a long time now has been missing in the vocabulary of world politicians. While we think of the Christmas Day airlift of Russian troops into Afghanistan, we should recall that almost 2 years earlier, Afghanistan's President Mohammed Dawood had been killed by left-wing rebels, thus bringing to an end 2 centuries of authoritarian rule by a dynasty of chieftains and nationalistic kings, and opened the door to the Arabian Sea for Russian communist expansionism. Way back in 1893, when Britain drew the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan, it ignored the fact that it chopped off one of Afghanistan's largest groups of 2.5 million nomads into 2. The southern group of Pashtuns were incorporated within Pakistan. Now, while these Pashtun tribes have not bothered over much about such niceties as national boundaries, both Afghanistan and Pakistan have made considerable efforts toward claiming this vital piece of geography to the south of Afghanistan as parts of their own respective countries. And if you look at a map of the area, you will see that the land occupied by the Pashtun tribes extends right down to the Arabian Sea. Now, this could be a key in the developments which have taken place in Afghanistan since December last year. These tribes, that is, the Pashtun tribes, have traditionally been conservative in their outlook and loyal to the established government and royal family. With the establishment of a Marxist administration in Afghanistan, the Pashtun tribes would be drawn into the Pakistani side, which is perhaps why Moscow moved into Afghanistan to provide more than a little military weight to the claims of Afghanistan to the area which, if incorporated, would provide Russia with ready access to the Indian Ocean via the Arabian Sea. It is this story of Afghanistan, plus that of Iran, which has given rise to much speculation concerning the possibility of war between the United States and Russia, and many have considered that we are virtually on the brink of the end of the age, and truly the war to end all wars. This, in point of fact, is what many have described as the Armageddon of Bible prophecy. And while I personally have no argument with the magnitude of the times, nor the names which people may use, I feel that we should, at this stage anyhow, take a look at the title of this address, Islam, a Sword or a Sickle, in order to ascertain whether or not it has a part to play in the scheme of things pertaining to the end of the age. As we all know, Islam, since its inception in the days of Muhammad, has been characterized by the scimitar or the sword, while communist Russia has been characterized by the hammer and the sickle. What we are finding today, in the case of Afghanistan at least, is that both sword and sickle appear to be joining, which could well be the case if the United States took any military action to free its embassy hostages held in Tehran by the Iranian students. The Islamic revolution, which deposed the Shah, has been perpetuated under a tremendous religious fervor, and any move by the United States toward involvement with Iran would no doubt be projected as a threat to the revolution, and thus a threat generally to Islam throughout the whole world. The situation has a tremendous potential, and one that could well set off the mechanism of the end of the age. Now, it's all very well simply talking about the end of the age, a term which means many things to many people. And so I would like us to consider the Scriptures in respect of this. I would like to read from Revelation 14. That is the 14th chapter of Revelation, and verse 14 to the end of the chapter. If you have a Schofield Reference Bible, you will note that this passage is prefaced with the words, "Vision of Armageddon," conveying the meaning that this passage deals with the events which lead up to the second advent and to the millennial reign of our Lord Jesus Christ. This now is from verse 14 of the 14th chapter of the Revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ. We will read it. "And I looked, and behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat upon the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud voice to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horses' bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Now this sickle, the fact of the sickle, is mentioned no less than 7 times in this picture of the end of the age, and is used in the sense of an instrument which is used by both the angel of the Lord and by one like unto the Son of Man, to accomplish a specific purpose in the earth. Now, in dealing with purposes, before going on, we know, do we not, that God had commissioned his people, Israel, to accomplish his purpose in the earth, and that this people, not some counterfeit or any other substitute, locked inescapably within God's honor and God's oath, has become so inert through satanic propaganda that it, that is Israel, is now aiding and abetting the satanic enterprise of bringing about a one-world socialistic state. As things are at the moment, there appears to be absolutely nothing that will bring us to our senses. We appear to be totally committed to Satan's victory road. And unless there is stimulus and action from on high, the blood-sealed covenant of divine intent in the earth is heading for oblivion. This, of course, is no new thing. Once before in our history, God's people jeopardized his plan and purpose by ignoring his commands and substituting these with humanitarian considerations, thus integrating with all and sundry. If you care to read the first chapter of the book of Isaiah, you will see Satan's victory road into which Israel was led, and if you analyze the situation then, you will see that the situation was not very different from that which obtains today with Anglo-Saxondom. Just note the situation. This is what is written. The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider. This, of course, is taken from verse 3 of Isaiah 1. Is this not exactly the situation today? We, as a people, have become obsessed with our so-called Gentile status, having given our name and title to the Jew, and we do not know that we belong to God, having been purchased and redeemed in the blood of his Son. If you read on, you will see that Israel had become a sinful nation. That is, having covenanted to keep God's holy law, they decided that this was outdated, and this because of changing circumstances, and had adopted a way of life which had as its cornerstone the accommodation, the integration with all and sundry. Now look at verse 7. Here indeed we have the breakdown of Israel. Strangers, aliens dominated both cities and countries, and the general morality of the people had begun to degenerate to that which characterized previously Sodom and Gomorrah. The sickle of God went into those forebears of ours, a sickle which took the form of the Assyrian, who, very much like Russia today, was expanding its imperialism and expansionism, which saved God's people from total rot which it had allowed to set in. Thus the Assyrian Empire was an instrument in the hand of our God, a sickle used against Israel, but a national salvation used to remove the nation from the environment of evil. This is what it was all about then. Do we, as a people, not need something desperate, of tremendous magnitude, to shake us out of the inertia into which we have today drifted? I believe that it's going to take a real tragedy to shake us all up, and then only will we return to our God. Now, having said this, I think that we can appreciate the true meaning of the sickle. I am sure that you will be wondering now where the sword of Islam comes into the picture. I wonder if you noticed that the one, like unto the Son of Man, had on his head, in our reading, a golden crown. Now, this is somewhat different. You know, if we go to Revelation 19 and the 12th verse, we see there that our Lord at his advent has on his head many crowns. But here in the Revelation 14, we have one like unto the Son of Man. It doesn't say that it is the Son of Man. One like unto the Son of Man, who had on his head a golden crown. Now, if we go back to the 9th chapter of the Revelation of our Lord, we will note that a crown of gold is part and parcel of the description of locusts, which had a specific purpose in the earth to accomplish a purpose for God on the Roman earth. Let's quote verse 7 of Revelation 9. Just note what is said here. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. I have, of course, not read the whole of what is described as the first woe. This falls within that context. I am sure that you would care to read this for yourselves. I have merely drawn attention to the fact that those involved with this woe were characterized by the wearing of crowns like gold, and was directed against imperial Rome. Can we now identify this with Islam? Firstly, we must ascertain what is meant by the word Islam. And from most sources that I have consulted, it would appear to mean surrender to God, and is associated with Muhammad although traditionally it is claimed that Islam goes right back to the Garden of Eden. According to Arab legend, Adam and Eve, after their expulsion from the garden, wandered separately over the earth for many years and were finally reunited on Mount Arafat, just close by the present-day Mecca. It is further claimed that one of Adam's first duties was the building of the Kaaba, which they claim was later destroyed in the flood and then rebuilt by both Abraham and Ishmael. This cube-shaped, windowless, flat-roofed building has in one of the sharp corners of its outer wall a black stone, or rather, let's be more specific, it has a stone of 12 segments, which are united by dark cement and are held together by a silver band some 7 inches in diameter. This stone, according to tradition, came from paradise and was handed by the angel Gabriel to Abraham and Ishmael at the time when they were building the Kaaba. Originally, this stone, or this 12-segmented stone, was snow white in color, although through having been kissed by millions of so-called sinners over the years who made their yearly pilgrimage to Mecca, it is now almost black. This stone, or the fragments, have never really been subjected to true scientific investigation. As to most people, it is simply a holy stone, and they leave it at that. Others, looking at it from afar, have asserted that it comes from Abu Qubays, the hills nearby to Mecca. Others again say that it is volcanic in origin, or simply that a meteorite landed there, and as it landed in that position, so they built the Kaaba around it. Now, whatever its origin, we do know that the stone itself became worshipped by the Arabs in the 2nd century of the Christian dispensation. We have a writer, Maximus Tyrius, writing about this, and these are his words. He wrote there, "Arabians pray to a god which is represented by a rectangular building in which there is a black stone." There is that stone within the Kaaba. Today, the Muslims venerate the stone as much for tradition's sake as for anything else. Before acceptance of Muhammad's teaching, the Arabs had a peculiar predisposition toward establishing stone cults, and at one time the Kaaba was filled with all sorts of rudely hewn blocks of granite. At one time, it is said that there were 360 of these, supposed, of course, to represent firstly Abraham and then Ishmael, with other pious men. However, in the passage of time, phallic worship dominated, and the black stone became the center of this. Before the advent of Muhammad, Mecca had become a hotbed of degeneracy, and indeed most of the Arab peoples who lived in cities followed this trend. Now, Muhammad was a desert man. He came from the desert, and it was the desert people who carried Islam around the world. Initially, both he and his wife, Khadijah, they were idolaters, and he never questioned the ritual of the Kaaba until, so says the record, one day he looked at the 360-odd grotesque phallic emblems and was filled with revulsion. From this point in time, he saw himself as a prophet, and his life was, from that moment onwards, regulated by his concept of the need to reform the people who had degenerated the worship of the one true God. It would appear that in 610, in the month of Ramadan, that Muhammad had gone to his cave on Mount Hira to fast and to pray, and it was on this occasion that Gabriel is said to have visited him and provided him with the first of his revelations, which were to become the Quran, and which in fact were destined to change the course of Arabic history. Now, I have absolutely no intention of quoting from the Quran. Our revelation from God is His holy word, which is recorded in our Bible. But it would serve at this moment in time to note that over a 22-year period, Muhammad produced a discipline which has had a profound effect on a large section even of our modern world. In general, some of the Quran's chapters are short, fiery warnings of doom, of judgment day, and the need to worship the one true God. Others discuss the lives of our prophets, our biblical prophets, and the lessons of their lives. Still others lay down detailed regulations concerning the family, property, and justice. Whatever else one may say, the impact of Muhammad and the Quran was tremendous, so much so that in less than 10 years after Muhammad's death, Islam shook the foundations of Byzantium and Persia, the two most powerful civilizations of that era. It is at this point that we find the description of crowns like gold of Revelation 9, associated with Islam in its assault against imperial Rome. And as must be obvious, we are now joining the stream of history as it impinges upon Rome, and we're going to follow this through. Now, I make absolutely no apology for digressing here, because we must follow the course of events if we are to positively identify the crowns of gold as the locusts whose initial purpose was to harass and to torment the Roman earth for a period of 5 prophetic months. The once prodigious imperial Roman Empire, as we know, was divided into two in the year 476 AD, when Romulus Augustus was deposed by the Heruli, and from that time the insignia of Roman authority became centered in Constantinople in the east. Imperial Rome, as such, had now gone. But while the last vestiges of this remained in Constantinople, there was always the chance that it might rise again. It was against this, the eastern center, that the locust hordes were unleashed. And to vindicate the identity of this with Islam, we have but to consider the fact that Revelation speaks of a torment for 5 months. And as we shall see, history adds its voice to our contention that it was indeed Islam. It was in the year 612 that Muhammad proclaimed his mission to wield the sword of Islam against the infidels, and countless numbers from the deserts of Arabia rallied to his call. Is it purely coincidental that Arabia is the home of the scorpion and the locust, which, if you read the 9th chapter of Revelation again, you will note that this was the identity of the torment upon Rome. This Islamic horde overran the whole of the Roman world, extending as far westwards, even as far as Spain, and holding this area in subjugation until the Battle of Tours in 732, when Shah Martel checked their spread into Europe proper. The Battle of Tours marked the end of the Islamic exploit westwards, but this battle lasted for a further 30 years, and it was only after this that the Islamic or the Muslim began to withdraw eastwards to the land of their origins. As history once again confirms, this thrust, if we can call it by that name, lasted exactly 150 years. And this is the exact period which, according to the Revelation, the locusts would torment the Roman earth. For the convenience of those who do not know, in prophecy, a day is reckoned as 1 year. If you wish to confirm this, you can read Ezekiel, the 4th chapter, verse 6. Now, the story is that this would be for 5 months. This torment would be for 5 months. Now, a biblical month was exactly 30 days. Therefore, 5 months would be equivalent to 150 days. Now, as we have said, prophetically, a day is as a year. Therefore, the locust torment would be for a period of exactly 150 years, which is precisely the duration of the Islamic expedition westwards in the 8th century AD. Now, as we always have skeptics with us who would claim that the Islamic invasion of the West was just a coincidence and did not necessarily indicate the Muslim with the scorpion or the locust, let us look at these scriptures once again and note verses 7 to 9. Let's read it again. I have read 7 before, but let's read it again. And the shapes of the locusts were like horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns of gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. Let us take a look at this, the crowns of gold. How does one associate this? We have no better definition, you know, than that provided by Pliny, who wrote that the Arabs wore their hair long and uncut as a sign of their manhood. That's first identity. While in the most characteristic of Arab poems called the Anta, the yellow turbans which were worn were considered by the people to be individual crowns. Thus the sight of yellow-turbaned Muslims was no strange thing, particularly if we recall that it was widely held that these turbans represented the diadems promised by Allah. The breastplates of iron, too, is indeed worthy of note, for this was part and parcel of the warrior's uniform of war. Indeed, as is stated in the Koran, coats of mail were given by God to defend you in your wars. It's part and parcel of the Koran, you see. This, then, was the first impact of Islam in recorded history, that on the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. The second began some 300 years later, when the Turks emerged from the region of the Euphrates River. The Turks, you will note, that while being Oriental in their origins, were Islamic in faith. And so we have Muhammad's creed once again motivating a people who finally destroyed the last vestiges of imperial Rome. Once again, if we look at the 9th chapter of the book of the Revelation, we see this Islamic force in action, and once again under such terms as to make identity of this people involved here unmistakable. In verses 14 and 15, we are told that the great river Euphrates was to be the scene from which the force would issue forth, and that they would take an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year for to slay the third part of men. And so at the outset, we have two features of importance. One, the place of origin, and two, the duration of the exercise. It's a matter of history that the Turks issued from the region of the Euphrates, and that they were under the persuasion of the Islamic faith. They are to this very day. They began the exercise in the year 1062 by striking northward, aiming, as it were, for Constantinople. There is no reason why they should have done this, but this is exactly what they did do. They struck out northwards, aiming, as it were, for Constantinople, while in the south a southern thrust was made into the Holy Land. Now, as I have said, in 1062, the Islamic Turks thrust northwards for Constantinople and southwards into the Holy Land. We should, of course, remember that we are now dealing with a period in time which history records as the era of the Crusades, during which for almost 2 centuries the Islamic Turks were contained and denied total dominion over Palestine. However, in 1291, the Crusader kingdom fell, and this appeared to be a signal for the Turks to launch an attack on the remnant of the Imperial Roman Empire. It would seem as though the Crusaders drew all their forces, all the Islamic forces, into the tremendous battle for dominion in Palestine itself, and so the thrust towards the north, towards Constantinople, was contained for a while. But with the downfall of the Crusader kingdom, as it were, the signal appeared to be go north. And this is exactly what went on. In 1453, Constantinople, the eastern capital of Imperial Rome, fell to the Turks, and Rome, as an imperial power, passed into history. Now, take the date of the initial emergence of the Turks from the Euphrates region, which was 1062, and note the downfall of Constantinople in 1453. How many years do we have? 391 years, the exact hour, day, month, and a year as prescribed in Revelation 9. There's one other point which should be noted before we pass on, and that is that according to the Revelation, the third part of men were to be killed by, let's quote, the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone which issued forth out of their mouths. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople had been secure against the attacks from all quarters. The Goths, Huns, Avars, Persians, Bulgarians, and even the Turks had all laid siege to the city, but had never succeeded in taking it. Now, however, things had changed. Edward Gibbon, that unconscious commentator on the historical validity of the book of the Revelation, confirms this picture in the Revelation when he described the Turkish artillery as it bombarded Constantinople, and in which he wrote, quote, volleys of lances and arrows were accompanied with the smoke, the sound, and the fire of musketry and cannon, to which he added that the, quote, fortifications, which had stood for ages against hostile violence, were dismantled on all sides by the Ottoman cannon. Does this not confirm it? It was to be destroyed by fire, by the smoke, by the brimstone which issued forth out of their mouths. A tremendous picture here of cannon that was used by the Islamic Turks. However, let's pass on. By 1453, Imperial Rome had fallen, and while the Revelation then swings its attention to Papal Rome and its impingement on God's people now in their appointed place, we are left to wonder why there's no further mention of the Islamic power. There are, of course, those who would contend that the false prophet, the third entity in the Trinity of Evil of Revelation 16, is the Islamic power, and I personally do not believe this is so. Muhammad, with his Islamic creed, did wonders for the Arab people, who, despite 5 centuries of intense Christian and Jewish missionary work, had remained idolaters and phallic worshippers. Muhammad, with his creed, came and the people followed, and whatever we may think of Islam, it had the profound effect of making the Arabs God, or at least Allah, conscious. A feature which was missing when it came to the effect of the missionary work done by both Jews and Christians. Once again I say that whatever we think of the Quran and the Islamic faith, it has made the Arabs God-conscious. How could this be false when weighed against the moral and spiritual depravity which obtained prior to Muhammad's advent? No, I don't think this. I don't equate Islam with the false prophet. This role fits many who profess to be Christian teachers today and could well be synonymous with the social and the liberal gospels which are furthering the cause of atheistic communism today. However, I'm not discussing the false prophet here. I'm wondering, and I'm sure you are, where the present Islamic situation fits this end of the age picture. We know, as is related in Revelation 16, that the Euphrates, the symbol of the Islamic Turks, was to dry up, and that this took place, of course, in the years 1917 to 1924, when the caliphate was abolished and Turkey became a republic. But what of those people who had crowns of gold, whose influence in the world of today is prodigious, to say the least? It is my belief that having used these people, who are at least faithful to their faith in terms of the revelation given to them, God will again use them in his own way to create a situation in true Israel where they will come to their senses and that they will know that he is God. Now, I don't think or don't say that I said this. I do not mean that we should embrace Islam. This faith was designed for the Arabs, not us. We have the revelation of God given to us through the pages of his holy word. I don't believe that God has changed his plan one iota, and that his meticulously drafted blueprint as recorded in the Abrahamic covenant has been changed at all. I believe that all this will be totally fulfilled when his people are in a fit frame of mind to accept it with a childlike faith. Currently, you know, we are too filled with the traditions of men, too filled with the arrogance which is synonymous with the Pharisees of old. We believe that we know much better than God how to run this world, and so we have given him 1 day a week. No, let's stop there. No, we have given him 1 hour of 1 day a week, and we have limited him to the 4 walls of a church. It is against this background of the assumed Gentile arrogance that our God is using the Islamic world and the communist world to bring us to a position where we will have to depend on him for both national salvation and a future worth living. Whether or not the lesson that we are going to learn will be long or short, I can't say. We have, of course, time factors, which I have mentioned previously, namely the end of the times of the nation, which appears to be sometime between 1982 and 1985. But whether or not this time is set aside for us to taste the bitter fruits of our national folly, only the future will tell. One thing, however, is sure, and that is we are due to learn a lesson that we shall never forget, a lesson provided in the hard school of experience. Today, in the world around us, a lesson is staring us in the face, but we, in our blindness, will not learn from it. Take the Islamic faith and take Christianity. Weigh the two against the present world scene and see what comes up. In Africa, where Christian missionary enterprise has been so prodigious, we find that on attaining their independence, the blacks have rejected Christianity and have embraced Islam. Do you know that today it is authoritatively claimed that Africa is a Muslim country, that with between 60 and 70% of the total population embracing the Islamic faith? This has only happened, you know, since the winds of change have blown, that is, over the past 30 years or so. How many of our people have taken the trouble to ask why it is that Islam has replaced Christianity? What is it that makes the Islamic faith more appealing to races which have a simple philosophy of wanting the material things of life to sustain them? The answer to this is lesson number 1. Islam, whatever else it may have, has this about it, that it appeals in that it does not separate religion and state. The two are one. In our Christian faith, we separate the two, and in any attempt to unify them, we find this challenged and fought tooth and nail. In our original Israel polity, established at Sinai, no line was drawn dividing the two. In fact, religion, as this is understood today, was missing entirely, with the nation living under a theocracy in which the will of God was the national constitution. Today, however, we hear sanctimonious and very pious people holding up their hands in horror when the subject of politics is mentioned, claiming that you mustn't mix the Bible and politics. Isn't this where we have gone wrong? I'm sure it is. This is a lesson that we have yet to learn. And our God is providing this lesson for us in the expansion of Islam and its successors in the very areas where we, in our folly, sought to teach what we thought God wanted us to. Isn't it time that we examined our commission again and realized that we've gone beyond the mandate which was given to us? Islam has become a prodigious force in the world of today. And just like the hammer and sickle of communist Russia is being used to bring us, we, God's covenant people, into a situation where he can at least work with us. Remember, he said, "Ye are my witnesses that I am God." There's certainly no witness in our current situation. Absolutely none. And that which we thought was a witness activity has turned out to be a damp squid. In order that he should vindicate his word of promise and commission, our God today is using both Russia and Islam to create a situation which necessitates a divine intervention of unprecedented magnitude, and of which David all those years ago said, "Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power." This you'll find in Psalm 110, verse 3. This day of the power of God is still in the future, and we are left now to endure until that great day dawns. Is this not precisely the true meaning behind the words of our Lord when he said, "Watch and pray"? The whole context in which he made this statement presupposes a total inadequacy to cope with the overall situation, which is precisely the situation today in which we, the Anglo-Celto-Saxon and kindred people, find ourselves. There is absolutely nothing that we can do to halt the rot which we have allowed to set in, but we can watch as the end of the age develops before our very eyes. Arising out of our willful blindness, we see the Islamic faith capitalizing and providing the third world nations with a faith which is more acceptable to them. We see the communist political system making vast inroads among the people with whom we have been in contact for so many years, and by actually supplanting all that we have attempted to do. Thus we see that in our relation with other people we have failed, and yet we will not stop and take a look at the cause of our failure and realize that we have a lack of that indefinable something which compels attention and desire. We lack the law of God, my friends. We lack the Constitution which gives content and meaning in our national life. Let us take a look at the world of today. Let us watch as the various pieces of the vast end of the age scene fall into places. Let us look firstly at Russia, which today is pressing ahead with its expansionist plan, doing things such as the invasion of Afghanistan at a time when such adventures would not enhance the Russian image in the world. It is my opinion that forces are at work in the Soviet Union, which is forcing the Kremlin along lines which under normal circumstances it would not follow. Within what is called the Soviet Union, we find some 100 different national, cultural, and ethnic groups, which means that they have more than 100 different language groups, all of which are separated by history, religion, racial characteristic, traditions, and beliefs. Thus we have a potential powder keg right here. The aftermath of the 1917 revolution and the stringency of the methods used to implement the Communist Manifesto kept the people fully occupied until comparatively recently, when the inherent diversity of the peoples began to assert itself. Over the past few years, we have seen, and I'm sure you will agree here, that dissidents have arisen. This dissident feature is one of the characteristics which supports what I have just said, that there is the bubbling up to the surface now of the nationality, the ethnic integrity of the peoples beginning to want some expression. I'd like to go a little bit further. Let's go back to 1944. Stalin deported over 200,000 Tatars from the Crimea to Central Asia. They were reported to have assisted the Germans during the war. After the war, these Tatars demanded that they wanted to return to their original homeland, but this was ignored until 1967. The Kremlin granted them the legal status of their ethnicity, but they didn't allow them to go back, you know. They didn't allow them to go back to the Crimea. Oh, no. They stayed where they were. But the Tatars, my friends, are Muslims. And together with other Muslim groups within the Soviet Union, if they ever got together, this could create quite a threat to the Kremlin, which is atheistic in the extreme. Slowly but surely, statistics are proving that the Muslims in Russia are increasing. It is estimated that within the Soviet Union, 1 citizen today in 6 is a Muslim, a ratio which by the turn of the century, due to the population explosion, will become 1 in 3. Thus, Islam is a factor to be considered in the overall politics of the Kremlin, and they're taking note of this. When Russia moved into Afghanistan, a Muslim country, you will note, it did so under the pretext that it was moving against Western imperialism, which in the world of today is projected as being anti-Muslim. The Iranian Revolution, too, is held up as being anti-Western, and despite the vagaries associated with what is really going on, the Islamic world is treated to the propaganda, which again is violently anti-Western. Let us look very briefly now at this Iranian Revolution. Basically, it is more than a little obvious that the Shah was betrayed from within his own country, and that those who did the betraying were paid from outside. This was no spontaneous uprising led by an uneducated Islamic priest called the Ayatollah Khomeini. It was a carefully planned operation carried out within the framework of an intimate knowledge of the character of the Iranian people. Basically, the Iranian men are lazy and prefer to spend their days in coffee houses, letting the women do the work, and in this frame of mind are ripe for any demonstration and will contribute to it at the fall of a hat. Any Iranian government, my friends, can be toppled if and when, in the scheme of things, this is desirable, and this is what has happened. Now, against this background, let us consider what has become a crisis area: oil. Russia, as any map will make clear, has a 2,400-mile common border with Iran. But it is doubtful if Russia will make any military gesture from this region. As things are at the moment, the today Communist Party dominates Iran's oil workers, and both oil and gas are today flowing into Russia. It is estimated that by 1982, Russia will need more and more oil, and the current pressure on the revolutionary government is to withhold oil from the West. Now, while President Carter has made noises about what America will do to safeguard its oil supplies in the Middle East, the Russians have gone plainly ahead and laid the foundations for a proxy move to take Iran under the pretext of safeguarding Islam against the West. With Afghanistan now firmly within the Soviet sphere of interest, and Iraq on the west also there, it would be a simple thing for the Kremlin to send both Iraqi and Afghani forces to take over Iran, just as they use the Cubans in Ethiopia, Angola, and South Yemen. Look at the picture again. If the current Afghanistan exercise if they succeed in this, and succeed in divorcing the Pashtun tribes from Pakistan, bringing them under the Afghanistan influence, Russia has a free way to the Arabian Sea. If they use Afghanistan and Iraq to take over Iran, they will have control of the entire Persian Gulf. Oil will be cut off to the West, which, as things are at the moment, must take some action to restore this flow of oil. Will this mean war? If it does, I am sure that it will truly be a war to end all wars, and that we, as a people, will only survive in this through divine help. Thus, as we look at the world around us, we see the picture of the end of the age building within our lifetime. We can be grateful, that our God has given us a warning of this. And as we look at the revelation of his Son, and we see the one like unto the Son of Man with a golden crown, and the sickle which reaps the harvest, we can only thank him for his infinite mercy in giving us, undeserving though we are, this assurance that come what may, his word, his plan, his purpose stands inviolate. And the day is fast approaching when all of this will be put into operation within a people who, despite themselves, have learnt the lesson not to go beyond the mandate which he has given us. The lesson is written today, my friends, in bold letters across every newspaper in every country in the world. It records failure, Anglo-Saxon failure, the triumph of the sword of Islam and the sickle and the hammer of Russia. A lesson which we are going to learn. A lesson which is going to equip us for the era yet to come. If only now we will look at the situation, reappraise it, analyze it, and know where we have gone wrong. My friends, now is the time for us to turn, learn the lesson of history, learn the lesson of today, embrace our God, and follow his directives. We will do it in the future. Let us do it now, voluntarily, and not through force. May God grant that the veil of blindness which is over us shall be lifted, and we will see before the dawning of that great day, the day of his power. Amen.